people with eating disorders. At what point did you realize that you had one, and what were the small signs that you noticed now were a major part of your illness? User 1: landing in the EDrecovery ward with a tube down my throat force-feeding me was the defining moment. I passed out across the street from my old job buying cigarettes. My co-workers called the ambulance. Apparently they'd been planning an intervention for close to a month at that point. That saved my life. I weighed 73 pounds. To this day I have the nastiest voice in my head. It takes conscious effort not to hate the way I look. And, use it too, oh man, I would way overeat to the point where my stomach couldn't take it. It honestly seemed, looking back, like a form of masochism. I exercised daily so never really put on weight from it. I realized I was in a huge depression. I saw a doctor about it, and instead of helping me really she told me to stand on the scales, and because I was at the top of the BMI, but within range, she told me to look after my weight and put me on antidepressants. Cue the bulimia. That doctor seriously fucked me up more rather than helping. I was binging and throwing up daily for about a year and in a very dark place. I remember gripping the sink a few times and looking in the mirror and repeating "you're losing control" over and over. I like to think of myself as strong-minded, and I must be, because I have since sorted myself out, changed many things in my life, and am happy. A year and a half later and my life is better in every aspect than it has ever been. And, user 3, if you are asking, I'm going to take a wild guess you might have one and want validation. A lot of doctors don't know how to diagnose if it's not within the regular parameters. Even if it's restricting once a week or once a month, it can turn into something more. I think eating disorders really need to be thought of more in the context of water seeping into rocks, freezing, and breaking it. For some, the water thaws and leaves after one winter, but the rock has been weakened but doesn't break. For others, their water seeps in repeatedly, and eventually breaks it. It happens slowly, not all at once, and every rock is different. Some people don't have the same propensity toward eating disorders, such as some rocks are less porous. Personally, I've had an eating disorder for so long, I don't know when it started. I was a skinny little kid but gained weight early and was always mocked for it. Doesn't help there's a family history of eating disorders, so I just followed protocol and stopped eating. An answer though: restriction. Restricting sweets or anything with sugar or bread. Started small with sweet, worked up to include all of that as well as more. If you feel there's signs and it's early, get help now. This isn't something you get to leave behind. It haunts you for your life, and you will never be skinny enough, never perfect enough. You will create barriers between you and everyone you know, and it will isolate you, and that makes it only worse. You can't always trust that voice in your head. It will destroy you if you let it, and sometimes even when you don't. And, user 4, I think the moment I realized was when people would make comments on how unhealthy sick I looked, and instead of feeling upset, I sort of got off on people thinking that, which really only encouraged me to eat less and lose more weight. Most of the signs were just things like exercising to the extreme, only eating one meal a day, abusing laxatives, secretly storing food in my room, joining pro-Ana Thinspo websites and looking at that shit religiously. I still do struggle with resorting to old ways, and I'm not sure if I'll ever fully recover. Hope you're okay though, op. And, user 5, when I moved schools midway through freshman year of high school, I actively skipped meals and avoided eating. I didn't have any motivations for it. It was just a constant feeling of, oh, I'm not really hungry. I'm not quite sure why, but I still don't really have an appetite, and I have to force myself to eat because I just don't feel hungry often. I don't think it was ever a huge issue. I think at the worst point I was a 90-pound, 5 feet 5 inches 15-year-old, which isn't that bad, considering that I've always been a thin person. I think the point that got me understanding it was when my parents asked how was lunch today, and I said I didn't eat, and then they asked about the day before, and I said I didn't eat, etc. So my parents started watching and making sure I was eating. And, user 6, I always thought of myself as the last person to ever develop an eating disorder, but there were a lot of signs that I missed. I was a perfectionist growing up, and I craved something to control that would distract me from my emotions. I never liked my body very much, but more than that, I never accepted myself as a person. I had just the right combination of self-hatred, depression, and disregard for my own well-being to end up with anorexia. My immediate obsession with counting calories was a small sign that led to major restriction in the future. I realized that I probably had an actual eating disorder when I tried to go back to normal eating and failed. I tried to stop restricting and I ended up purging several times every day. I wound up in a cycle of starving and purging until I was eventually hospitalized. I no longer struggle with eating, but it's clear to me now that my relationship with food was disordered for a long time before I realized that it was a problem. And, user 7, so many things. One of the lowest points was when I had strapped a tourniquet on and was injecting Lasix like heroin. The little things were far more subtle, the constant running of calories in my head, weighing myself dozens of times a day. I would starve myself, go on 10-mile walks, take my babysitting money to buy binge food at 7-11 which I would eat on the walks, then go to CVS on the way home to get X-Lax which I would take by handful. None of it was pretty. I was never deluded enough to think what I was doing wasn't a problem. I knew it wasn't normal and I went out of my way to hide it. The reality was, I didn't care. And, user 8, not me but my sister, I suspected that something was going on as I noticed that she was losing hair and was continuing to try to lose weight even though she was at healthy weight. My suspicions were confirmed when she started to cry in the middle of a grocery store. BC I asked her to swap one of her snacks with a similar item but that had 10 extra calories. And, user 9, every day I can't seem to get this issue out of my mind. I cannot go 2 hours without thinking about my body and weight. I'm 5 feet 6, 150 pounds. I'm not a skinny, nor am I a huge girl. I know this, and I know that I am really pretty. But early childhood conditioning has hindered my self-image. I have an older sister and older brother who were both verbally and emotionally abusive towards me. There was not one day that went by that I was not told that I was fat, ugly, stupid. I feel like I'm going to cry typing this. Ever since I was little, I sought comfort through food. I was constantly overeating. Until very recently have I noticed that I may have an internal issue when it comes to food. Maybe it's not necessarily an eating disorder, but being terrified of gaining too much weight and becoming fat ugly. Every single meal I have, there is an internal battle going on inside of me wanting me to eat as much as possible, and a side that doesn't want me to eat at all. And, user 10, I didn't realize it until I stopped it how bad it had gotten. The first thing I noticed was all the lies I told myself and others. I'm not hungry, I just ate. I don't sweat as much as most people. That's why I pass out. For me, it did start as a choice. I was 17, living with my horrible aunt and felt like I had no control over my own life and felt disconnected from my body. Due to gender identity issues, I decided that a way for me to gain control over my life and my body which I felt had betrayed me, was to restrict what I ate severely. I started skipping breakfast, saying I'd eat at school. Then I started telling my friends I was going to eat my lunch on the football field. I was actually sitting in the library and reading. Dinner was still an issue. My aunt always had food ready when I got home from school, so I'd say I had a lot of homework or some project to do and that I'd eat in my room. I'd set the food behind my TV and toss it out after they went to bed. Most days, I'd have a pack of ramen, mostly broth, half the flavor packet and half the noodles, and maybe a Coke. I'd eat after everyone went to bed. I was embarrassed to eat in front of other people and was for a long time, even after I started eating normally again. I ended up weighing 90 pounds at 5 feet 6, maybe less. I didn't weigh myself after I hit 90. The first thing that should have tipped me off, though, was when the cheerleader who sat in front of me in modern poetry told me I should join the team. Since I was so skinny, I said no, I'm not skinny. She asked what size pants I wore and I replied 14. I weighed 90 pounds. There was no way I was a 14 in pants. And, thanks for watching. Please give a like if you enjoyed the video and hit subscribe if you want to see more. See you later.